This father disciplines his 7 children daily using a militarized management style. Whenever the whistle blows, the children quickly assemble, marching in neat steps down the stairs to form a line. If anyone fails to keep up with the rhythm, they must step forward voluntarily to accept punishment. Witnessing such a cold and unfeeling family scene, the trusted family tutor was stunned and widened her eyes in shock. Before she could recover from her shock, the children, following the whistle, lined up in order of age from oldest to youngest and began introducing themselves. At this moment, Maria learned that the oldest among them was only 16 and the youngest was just 5. Just as she found all this hard to believe, the man beside her handed her a whistle, informing her that she would need to use the whistle to summon the children in the future, rather than calling them by name. Before she could respond, the man tried to impose the same method on Maria, but she firmly opposed. She believed such an approach was a violation of personal dignity. As the renowned Navy Captain George von Trapp, he had never been insulted in this way before, but he did not get angry. He only mocked Maria and then walked straight to the exit. Unexpectedly, Captain George was stopped in his tracks by a whistle. Immediately afterward, Maria, in a teasing tone, asked Captain George how she should address him, since she did not yet know. Captain George replied that she could call him George von Trapp. This was the first time the children saw their stern father frustrated, and after he left in a huff, they all couldn't help but laugh aloud. Maria was so informal because she was originally a nun in a monastery, naturally loving freedom, often singing loudly alone in the mountains, which caused her to be late or miss prayers repeatedly, making the other nuns both love and be annoyed by her. Even the abbess didn't know how to discipline her. At this moment, the abbess learned that Captain George's family urgently needed a governess, so she sent Maria to take the position. However, Maria never expected that this family was not only strict and cold with Captain George, but also that the children were not as obedient as they appeared. They were extremely resistant to the governess, having driven away 11 teachers in a row, some even leaving after only 5 minutes due to fear. Initially, Maria did not realize how serious the situation was until she felt a toad in her pocket. The maid revealed that Maria was considered lucky. The children's welcome gift to the previous teacher was a snake. Maria thought the test was over, but during dinner, she unexpectedly sat on a chair where someone had placed pine cones. Seeing Maria scream in pain from the pricks, the children's faces immediately lit up with triumphant smiles. They hoped that this new teacher would voluntarily resign to their father, so he would have to spend more time personally accompanying and guiding them. But unexpectedly, Maria not only refused to give up, but also sincerely thanked them for their courteous treatment. Perhaps having never experienced such acceptance before, the 5th daughter, Marta, suddenly cried out in guilt, followed by the other children, who also shed tears one after another. When the confused Captain George inquired about the reason, Maria simply explained that the children were moved to tears of joy because they felt happiness. Just as the dinner atmosphere became somewhat oppressive, the butler delivered a telegram. Baroness invited Captain George to Vienna as a guest. Learning that their father was about to leave home again, the children showed signs of sadness and dissatisfaction. Only the eldest daughter Liesel took advantage of everyone's distraction to quietly slip outside, secretly feeling delighted. It turned out that Liesel and the young boy Rolf, who delivered the telegram, had long harbored feelings for each other. However, their social status was vastly different, making open courtship impossible, so they could only meet secretly late at night. Like all young lovers, they always had endless words to say but remained cautious, respectful of each other, never crossing boundaries. Suddenly, thunder and lightning struck and heavy rain poured down. The two had no choice but to hide in a glass pavilion, where they clung to each other in the rain, exchanging vows. Meanwhile, the maid delivered new fabric to Maria's room, reminding her to make a new dress quickly. Captain George was very displeased with the old clothes she wore, which even the poor would not bother to look at. The maid also warned Maria not to sing at home, not even to laugh out loud. Since the lady of the house passed away, Captain George had become serious and taciturn, increasingly strict with the children. Moreover, to avoid triggering memories of his late wife, he strictly forbade anything that might evoke her memory. He even intended to marry a widowed baroness to completely rid himself of sorrow, and this trip to Vienna was to discuss the marriage. Maria, upon hearing this, felt deep sympathy for the 7 children. She also believed that God guided her to this family perhaps to help the children accept a new mother and restore family warmth. So she bowed her head in prayer. At that moment, Liesel returned from her outing, hurriedly climbing over the balcony and rushing into the house. Seeing Maria present, Liesel immediately worried that her actions might be exposed and begged her to keep it secret. Maria has always been tolerant of the children. Seeing Liesel soaked through by the rain, she felt even more compassionate. She not only promised to keep the secret, but also thoughtfully took out clean clothes, telling Liesel to change immediately in the bathroom to avoid being noticed. All hearts are tender, especially for children who have lost their mother. A little warmth is enough to make them feel happy. Feeling Maria's sincere care, Liesel accepted this new teacher wholeheartedly. While Liesel was changing clothes, the youngest Gretel suddenly pushed open the door and then threw herself into Maria's arms. With thunder rumbling, the other 3 girls also ran in panic, followed by 2 boys appearing with frightened faces. Staring at the 6 children frightened by the thunder, Maria pulled them into her bed and softly told them, whenever she feels scared, she thinks of beautiful things, such as lush green meadows, a starry night sky, or dewdrops on rose petals. This helps to gradually soothe her tense mood. Under Maria's guidance, the children quickly forgot the thunder outside the window and immersed themselves in imagining beautiful scenes. However, just as they were happily playing, Captain George walked in with a serious expression. Seeing that he seemed about to scold them again, Maria immediately signaled for the children to leave. Then she earnestly asked Captain George to allocate more fabric, hoping to make clothes for the children to go out and play, but was sharply refused. Fortunately, Maria remembered that the maid had mentioned the curtains in the room would be replaced the next day, so she used these old curtains to sew each of the 7 children a new outfit. After Captain George left home, Maria took the children out to play again. The sun was warm and spread across the land, with a gentle breeze carrying the fresh scent of grass. The children happily ran along the riverside path, eventually reaching a green hillside covered with white flowers. Maria knew her responsibility was to help the children establish a good relationship with their new mother, whom they had not yet met. During a picnic on the grass, the family tutor, who loved singing, decided to teach the children to sing, hoping they would use their voices to welcome the Baroness once they learned. However, the children said that since their father did not allow them to sing, they knew nothing about music. Helpless, Maria had to start teaching from the basic 7 notes. Fortunately, the children were quick learners and soon could connect the notes into beautiful melodies. Not long after, Captain George returned with the Baroness. As they strolled by the picturesque lake, chatting about feelings in life, they suddenly saw the children singing while rowing a small boat closer. When the children saw their father, they excitedly stood up, but due to the boat's imbalance, they fell into the water one after another. Fortunately, the lake was shallow, and both the children and Maria safely reached the shore. Watching the children, soaked but still laughing and playing, Captain George's initial displeasure grew into anger. But because the Baroness was present, he suppressed his fury and ordered the children to change their clothes immediately. Maria was about to leave with them, but was suddenly called back by Captain George. The Baroness tactfully excused herself. With no one else present, Captain George vented all his dissatisfaction on Maria, criticizing her for taking the children out to play and for letting them wear coarse cloth clothes. Maria calmly replied that the children did not care about their appearance. What they longed for was care and love, especially attention from their father. However, Captain George was often neglectful of the children, which led them to tease the family tutor to get a little of his attention. Although Maria's words were sincere and truthful, Captain George showed no remorse after hearing her and instead decided to dismiss her. Just as Maria was feeling aggrieved and speechless, melodious singing suddenly came from inside the house. Captain George followed the sound and found the children singing to welcome the arrival of the Baroness. This was the first time since his wife's passing that the house echoed with singing again. Warm memories of the past flooded his mind instantly. Captain George seemed inspired and unconsciously joined the children's chorus, when his deep, resonant voice blended with the children's bright and clear singing. The children couldn't help but hug him tightly. At this moment, Maria, who had been quietly standing behind the door, signaled Gretel to present a bunch of edelweiss to the Baroness. As Maria turned to leave, Captain George immediately caught up, sincerely apologized for his previous words, and earnestly asked her to stay. Maria happily agreed. In the days that followed, the house no longer echoed with harsh whistles. Instead, it was filled with laughter and increasingly rich musical activities. One day, After Maria and the children performed a puppet show, George's deeply moved friend suggested that the children participate in a folk festival choir competition and predicted they would become famous overnight. However, Captain George firmly opposed it, believing that children should not be overly exposed to the public. To ease the atmosphere, Maria intended to sing another song, but the children proposed that Captain George perform instead. Initially, he politely declined, but under Maria and the children's insistence, he finally took the guitar and sang Edelweiss. Edelweiss is Austria's national flower, small, white, elegant, and pure. This song, praising the Edelweiss, expressed the Austrian people's deep love for their homeland and good wishes. The touching song continued to echo, and the inspired children softly joined in harmony. The Baroness was moved by George's rare display of tenderness, but did not expect his gentle gaze to always fall on Maria in the corner. Sensing the crisis, the Baroness asked Captain George to host a ball for her, intending to publicly declare her authority, and George readily agreed. The ball was held as scheduled, attended by prominent figures, nobles, and dignitaries from all walks of life. After a lengthy exchange of pleasantries, the guests danced gracefully to the music. This was a widely known Austrian folk dance, and almost every guest was familiar with its melody and steps. However, the children felt unfamiliar and asked Maria to demonstrate. At this moment, Captain George also came out, saw Maria and the children struggling to dance, and took the initiative to step in for the children. At first, both were immersed in the rhythm of the dance, but as their bodies touched and their gazes met, a special affection quietly blossomed in their hearts. What was more awkward was that this scene was just seen by the Baroness. Maria immediately blushed and hurriedly found an excuse to leave, but soon returned to the hall. She needed to lead the children in performing for the guests. The performance concluded successfully, and after the children exited one by one, a friend of Captain George suddenly called out to Maria, who was about to leave, inviting her to stay for dinner. Unable to refuse kindly, Maria had to go upstairs to change into an evening dress suitable for the banquet. Unexpectedly, the Baroness also followed. After observing for a few days, the Baroness had noticed Captain George's affection for Maria, and Maria also harbored feelings for him. To eliminate this rival, the Baroness directly pointed out the unacknowledged flutter in Maria's heart. Leaving her stunned, being a nun, she should not have feelings. Previously, she could deceive herself, but now that her feelings were exposed openly, Maria could only choose to leave, which was exactly what the Baroness desired. Thus, Maria changed back into her original clothes, left a letter, and quietly departed from Captain George's house. The Baroness thought that once Maria left, she could monopolize Captain George's and the children's hearts. However, she did not understand that genuine relationships between people are based on sincerity, not excluding others. Even days after Maria's departure, she still failed to win the children's acceptance. On the contrary, the children often mentioned Maria and repeatedly asked Captain George if she would return. Captain George replied that Maria would not come back, and from now on, they would no longer need a governess. He was about to marry the Baroness, who would become the children's new mother. Despite their internal resistance, the children politely kissed the Baroness. Then, filled with sorrow, they went to the monastery hoping to see Maria once more. But the nuns informed them that Maria was in retreat and was not receiving visitors at the moment. The children could only return disappointed. Since returning to the monastery, Maria had kept herself locked in her room, and her once lively and cheerful spirit was gone. Seeing her so despondent, the abbess decided she could no longer let her continue like this and took the initiative to talk to her. After learning the full story, the abbess advised her, avoiding the problem won't solve anything. If she's unsure whether she truly loves Captain George, she should go back and find the answer. Remaining ambiguously in the monastery would not only disrespect the spirit of the monastery, but also be irresponsible for her own life. Monasteries do not welcome those who cling to worldly attachments, and Maria also has the right to pursue the life she truly desires. Meanwhile, the children, feeling down, sang the song that once made them happy. But the more they sang, the more they missed Maria, because that song carried their beautiful memories with her. Just as they fell into despair, Maria suddenly returned with her luggage. She finally heeded the abbess's advice and decided to pursue her true inner desires. However, this hope was suddenly shattered upon hearing the news that Captain George was about to marry the Baroness. But she did not leave immediately. Instead, she planned to settle the children first before making any further plans. The night was clear with bright moonlight, and the frogs' croaking was crisp. A confused Maria wandered alone outside the door, while Captain George silently watched her from the balcony. At this moment, The Baroness came out, saw Maria from a distance, and immediately realized she had been defeated in this emotional entanglement. Feeling unwilling to accept defeat, she still tried to salvage the situation, deliberately emphasizing her wealth in hopes of impressing Captain George. But Captain George always refused to see marriage as a transaction. Moreover, in his view, money could not compare to true love. He already possessed enough wealth himself. Hearing these words, the Baroness finally felt at ease. To preserve her last dignity, she took the initiative to suggest breaking up, saying she would return to Vienna tomorrow, and wished Captain George and his beloved happiness together. After speaking, the Baroness turned and left. Meanwhile, Maria, burdened with worries, sat alone on a bench lost in thought until Captain George approached slowly and softly told her that he had broken off his engagement with the Baroness. He could not marry one person while loving another in his heart. Though his words were subtle, Maria instantly understood their meaning. Before she could recover from her shock, Captain George affectionately kissed her forehead. The bright moonlight quietly shone down, freezing their figures into an eternal moment of love. Soon after, they held a wedding at the monastery, becoming husband and wife under the blessing of the nuns. However, the happy days had just begun when unfortunate news arrived. At that time, on the eve of World War II, Austria was annexed by Nazi Germany, and flags of the Nazis hung everywhere. When Captain George, returning from his honeymoon, found a Nazi flag hanging at his doorstep, he unhesitatingly tore it down and destroyed it. In his heart, Austria was always an independent and autonomous country, never disappeared, nor was it a vassal of the Nazis. But not everyone was like Captain George, who would never submit even in the face of oppression. On the contrary, many people, for survival or profit, willingly became traitors. For example, Rolf, who once dated Liesel, had now become a cold and ruthless tool of war. When Rolf handed the telegram back to Liesel again, the previous gentle smile and warmth were gone, replaced by complete indifference and alienation. Although they did not say a clear goodbye, Liesel understood that this relationship was over. After passing the telegram to Captain George, Liesel confided her feelings to Maria. Because it was her first love, she did not know how to get out of the shadow of heartbreak. Maria comforted her. If she was really upset, she could cry loudly, but after crying, she must let go of the past and face the new day with a positive attitude. After all, Liesel's life was just beginning, and her understanding of the world and human nature was still constantly being reshaped. One day, she will meet someone who truly understands and loves her, marry him, have children, and live a happy life together. Just as the two were talking about the future, Captain George suddenly came over and distracted Liesel that it turned out that the telegram ordered him to report to a certain German naval base. Refusing would bring misfortune to his family. Accepting would cause his faith to collapse. Whatever choice he made, it was a devastating blow to Captain George. Helplessly, he had no choice but to flee with his family overnight. Unexpectedly, the butler had already betrayed them, and before they could step out the door, the Nazis, having received the news, blocked the entrance. Thinking they were doomed, Captain George suddenly had an idea. Recalling that a friend had signed them up for a choir competition, which was scheduled for that very evening. Initially, he was reluctant to participate, but at this moment, this activity he once disliked became their only hope. Under the supervision of Nazi soldiers, Captain George led his family onto the stage and performed the choir. However, when he saw the compatriots sitting below, showing no sadness over the fall of their country and family, only indulging in their comfortable daily lives, he couldn't help but sing Edelweiss alone, trying to awaken their dormant patriotism. When Captain George choked with emotion and lost his voice during the song, the audience below was deeply moved and responded in unison. Moreover, upon learning that Captain George was about to be forced to serve in the German Navy, the host deliberately slowed down the announcement of the winners, and when the second and third place winners took the stage, they also made extra remarks, only to buy more time for George's family to escape. Initially, the Nazi leader overseeing the surveillance did not notice anything unusual until his subordinates hurriedly reported that Captain George's entire family was missing. He then quickly led people to the monastery. Although George and his family were indeed hiding there, with the help of the nuns, they were not discovered. After the search soldiers left, Captain George cautiously stepped out from behind a stone wall. Unexpectedly, Rolf, who had joined the Nazis, suddenly appeared and captured them on the spot. It turned out that earlier, when Liesel saw Rolf's face, she couldn't help but let out a soft cry. Though faint, it still aroused suspicion from Rolf Dassault. After his companions left, Rolf secretly lurked and indeed waited for Captain George to appear. Previously, Rolf had made a heartfelt promise to Liesel to protect her from harm, but now he had become the perpetrator. Seeing this, Captain George immediately waved to Maria to lead the children away. Since the Nazis' main target was Captain George, Rolf did not stop him. After his family had all left, Captain George slowly approached Rolf, earnestly, believing that he would not shoot, pointing out that he was still young, did not belong to the Nazi camp, and advising Rolf to leave with him by tea first. Rolf seemed moved, neither shooting nor resisting when George tried to take his gun. However, when Captain George firmly declared, "Rolf can never become a Nazi," the sensitive and insecure Rolf took it as mockery, and suddenly erupted in emotion, shouting for help loudly. Fortunately, Captain George's vehicle was nearby. He quickly drove with his family into the vast night. Although the Nazi soldiers wanted to pursue, they found that the vehicle could not start. Turns out, the nuns had already removed the key parts a minute earlier. Thus, Captain George's family, though successfully escaping, had to trek on foot across rugged mountains due to the border blockade, heading to a foreign land to start a new life.